Hello YouTube, it's Charlie in Westeros here, and I am back once again with another Game of Thrones episode review. Today I will be reviewing episode 7 of season 4, and the episode is of course entitled Mockingbird. As always, my episode reviews are spoiler-free, so there are no spoilers from the books in these reviews. However, if you are interested in watching content or discussion videos of the episodes with spoilers, you can check out James Johnson's channel, in which I will be reviewing with him every Wednesday at 8 p.m. The episode, and of course this discussion will contain spoilers, so I encourage you guys to check that out. I will post a link to his channel in the comments or in the info section below, and of course that discussion will be filmed live. You can see it right when we're discussing it, so it happens at 8 p.m. every Wednesday, and I encourage you guys to check it out if you have read the books or if you don't mind spoilers at all. So, without further ado, I will get into discussing this episode. So first things first I want to say is the name of the episode, Mockingbird, is very significant because although I think, it's overtly meant to reference Peter Baelish, given that his sigil for his house and the pin that he always wears is a mockingbird, I think the image of the mockingbird is significant for a number of individuals in this episode, but especially towards Sansa. Now, I will discuss why, when each character I think it applies to comes up in my discussion of this episode. But I will say that the mockingbird does come to signify a few things in this episode. For one thing, of course, the mockingbird is a bird that sings sweet melodies. It's pleasant to listen to before it flies off. On another level, it does symbolize innocence, just like in the book To Kill a Mockingbird, although I will not get into discussing that specific book, but just remember that mockingbirds, in this context, do symbolize innocence. I think this is a very, very important image that comes up in this episode. But on an even deeper or a more strange or messed up note, I think the mockingbird can be broken down even further as a word into two if you look at it in the context of a mocking space bird, i.e. a bird who is mocking you. Now, I know in the UK, a bird can be a bit of a slang word or a derogatory word to refer to a girl or a female or a woman, and more of a sexual nature, typically, from what I understand. If you're from the UK, correct me on this one, please. But you could apply this terminology to some female characters in this episode as, women or girls or females who are mocking or not taking seriously the characters they are interacting with. And I, again, will come back to that when each character comes up, but keep these specific definitions in mind as I go through this episode review. So without further ado, I guess I will begin. Oh, and also I go through events as they occur by location, not necessarily by chronology, so sometimes if things aren't going right the way they happen in the episode, don't worry, it's just how I do things. I will try to stick to the timeline of the episode as much as I can, but I cannot make any promises. So, without further ado, here is the first location or scene, which is at King's Landing, and the episode starts off with Tyrion in his cell. Well, I guess he is in hell at the same time. And he is being chastised by his brother Jaime for requesting a trial by combat. He basically asks Jaime to be his champion, but of course Jaime declines due to his poor performance with his left hand. And then of course Tyrion asks Jaime to go and find Bronn so that he might ask him to be his champion. From this scene, it becomes clear that Tyrion feels like Shae betrayed him and he was stupid to love her. But I still feel like there's something deeper going on here. There has to be, something that we, the viewers, do not know about. On a surface level, it looks like Shae is a quote-unquote mocking space bird, as I say, a female who's kind of mocking Tyrion, and in a way she did do that at the end of the last episode, in a sense, of the trial. But again, like I said in my last episode review, I just feel like there's something more significant or something that we don't know that is happening in terms of her character. It doesn't make any sense for her to just, on a whim betray Tyrion, even though, he did send her away. I don't think she is dumb enough to believe that he did it on a whim or just because he was disinterested in her. I think, she has to know he did it to protect her. She's not a dumb girl. There's no way that she just assumed that, but I won't get into my own verbiage or blah, blah, blah of how I feel on that. That's just, my hunch on her character at this moment. So right at the end of this scene, we then get a cutscene of who we find out is going to be the assumed individual to face off against Tyrion in his trial by combat, and that is, of course, the Mountain, who we have not seen, at least from what I recall, in quite a few seasons, actually. I think the last time we really saw him was in season 1, when he hacked off the head of a horse during the joust under King Robert Baratheon. Maybe we saw him in season 2, I can't quite recall, but from the top of my mind, I don't remember seeing him. Anyway, naturally, the scene reminds us of how terrifying and bloodthirsty the Mountain is, or was, but I do need to say that, and I know this isn't the most significant part of the scene, but Gregor, aka the Mountain, even though he is supposed to be the Hound or Sandor Clegane's older brother, the actor looked a lot younger than his supposed younger brother, which felt a little weird given that, he is supposed to be older. Maybe I know I'm just nitpicking at this one here, and maybe, it's just meant to show that Sandor's been through a lot, and, Gregor is still in good shape, even though he's been wandering the land. Either way, this thought was still in the back of my mind, and I guess I just finally need to mention it when we did, finally get reintroduced to the Mountain in these circumstances. So I'll leave it at that. But later on, we do have Bronn finally visiting Tyrion. We find out that Cersei has more or less paid off Bronn by ensuring that he doesn't help Tyrion by having him married to a dim-witted noble girl named Lolly Stokeworth, in the hopes that, at least in Bronn's hopes that he'll get her inheritance, with the idea that he might kill off Lolly Stokeworth's older sister, who would be the main heir of that land. Now, it's rather sad to see Bronn so openly, well, maybe I should use the word betray Tyrion in this case, but at the same time, he does remain totally honest with Tyrion, and he even tells him that he likes Tyrion, and that he considers him, I guess, a friend to some degree, but at the same time, he does value his own life, and he does tell Tyrion, quote, when have you risked your life for me? Which is a valid point in his defense, but it is still disappointing to see this duo end and find out that Tyrion cannot find any help from Bronn in this upcoming duel, which is sort of sad. But fortunately, by the end of the episode, Oberyn Martell reveals that he will act as Tyrion's champion in his trial by combat because, of course, he wants vengeance against the Mountain for having murdered his sister Elia. I think that last scene, in terms of events at King's Landing, was quite interesting because we also learned just how truly tortured Tyrion was growing up, and how Cersei would do the most cruel things to him. But even back then, Jaime would still protect his little brother. I think the most interesting thing we learn about the scene is the unfortunate way in which people who are, I guess, different or abnormal are treated in Westeros, since even though Tyrion was only a dwarf when he was born, people all over the land gave him all kinds of uncommon attributes or physical characteristics when he was born. Like, people were saying he was a hermaphrodite, there was physical disfigurations, he only had one eye, one red eye if I recall. He was lacking limbs and organs, perhaps, when he was born, according to the people, which of course none of is true. And in our society, we don't consider these things, wrong by any mean. So it just goes to show the mentality of things in Westeros in this, pseudo medieval period, which is quite significant, and it, I guess, reaffirms how Tyrion is perceived by the the world at large just because of how he looks, which is, well, it's pretty tragic, I guess, to say the least. In the end, all I can really say is I truly look forward to the matchup between Oberyn and Gregor Clegane, and for once, at the end of this episode, we finally get to see that Tyrion looks like he has seen a glimmer of hope in receiving justice at long, long last, or at least in his mind anyway. So, next episode's going to be pretty cray-cray, I can tell you guys that much. But, moving it along, I then want to address events across the Narrow Sea. So in this scene, I think there is something we've all been waiting for quite some time, which is, of course, the love scene, the love-making scene between Daario and Daenerys. Now, let me just say she does not mess around at all. The love scene wasn't, well, as romantic, I guess, as I was expecting it to turn out, or as I was hoping it would be. But the scene was interesting in a number of other ways. In one sense, it reminds us a little bit of Khal Drogo, actually, and I say this mostly because of the shot of him disrobing is almost the same one as when Daenerys first makes love, not just having sex, making love with Drogo when she is in the Dothraki hut with his, butt out in the foreground, and she is in the background, lounging out, waiting for him. And in this scene here, it shows Daenerys sitting in the background and Daario disrobing with his, butt hanging out in the front. Now, maybe I'm reading a bit too much into these two scenes, but it certainly, in my opinion, does symbolize Daenerys' apparent or imagined power or control she holds in both these scenarios, since they were in different ways meant to show her being in control or in charge of the situations in which she was having sex. But in another way, I think this scene that with Daario does echo back to the title of the episode itself. In two ways, really. In another way, I think it echoes back to it by the Mockingbird, which is of course used in a more derogatory way, since Daenerys, as a mocking space bird, is she's more or less toying with Daario for her own pleasure, and she totally, and of course this totally contradicts the traditional or typical association of the Mockingbird with innocence, since here she's not innocent at all. She is a fully sexual being, knowing what she wants, but she is still toying with Daario for her own amusement or pleasure. This also comes across when Daenerys talks to Jorah in the next scene with her, and and she expresses her distaste for Daario and her trust for him. So, in one sense, she is expressing desire to make love or have sex with him, I guess, and be in control of him. Next one, she kind of just dismisses him as just not really that important, which is quite interesting. It is also interesting that Ser Jorah sways Daenerys to change her mind in this next scene over immediately killing all the wise masters of Yunkai, who have, of course, risen up once again against her. And she sends Daario over to attack the city with his forces, and, of course, assuming if he captures the city, to kill them all. But, of course, she claims that or at least she makes it seem like Jorah convinced her to give them an ultimatum instead. I'm sorry, guys, by the way, it's really late here, so if I get a little caught up in my wording, please forgive me. I'll try to make this as clear and as coherent as possible, so bear with me. Going back to that, even though Jorah convinces Daenerys to change her mind on that matter, I don't think it's just her choosing to be benevolent, but on a more covert level, I do feel it was a way for her to perhaps childishly play Daario and Ser Jorah against each other on a superficial level, since we know that it looks like Ser Jorah does at least have some kind of feelings, or he likes Daenerys on some level. And if he does tell Daario, like she orders, that, Ser Jorah was the one to change her mind, it might come across as, that she is expressing some interest in Ser Jorah to Daario. And, maybe it'll cause some friction between them. But, maybe that's just me reading into this whole dynamic way too much. So I will leave that with you guys. On a slightly different and more current, I guess, pop culture note, however, I did feel that both scenes with Daenerys episode sort of reminded me of Katy Perry's latest music video, Dark Horse, since, in that music video it shows Katy Perry as the queen of ancient Egypt, receiving all kinds of suitors, and seemingly none of them being much value to her. They're only kind of temporary distractions, and that's symbolized by the various gifts that they bring her before, she turns them into sand. And I felt that, that image, I know it's a music video and it's, meant to be cheesy, whatever. It did kind of remind me of Daenerys in this circumstance, since she is temporarily amused by this male influence or this male presence of Daario before she just sends him off to, fight her war, I guess. Now, you guys all know that I'm a huge Daenerys lover, but in this case, she didn't come across, or she still hasn't come across as an emotive and loving or deep character as she has in the past. And of course, like I always say, I think this goes back to the fact that there's no dragons present. I always say whenever there's a wild, or whenever one of the mythical creatures are present with their, not owners, but their, well, I guess their partners, their human partners, to me it means that that these characters are being true to themselves. They're being emotionally honest and real with themselves, and they are in better predicaments or better situations. And of course, in this case, there's no dragons, and Daenerys is showing her unemotive or unrelatable side for us, the viewers. So just a little symbolism I want to throw out there for you guys, and that I have brought up before, I do believe. Anyway, moving it along, we then have a scene at Dragonstone. Again, the Mockingbird theme here is turned on its head, like I've mentioned, since we have Melisandre more or less reveal her own trickery with little potions that she has, and that she even says she herself thinks lying is sometimes useful and necessary, more or less. Of course, the sense that she is a mocking space bird. Of course, she's even naked in the scene, which kind of I think goes to reaffirm that idea. Not that nudity is to be shamed or anything, or is a shameful thing, but in the context of the scene, I think it was meant to reaffirm that message that she is a mocking space bird. It is also present, like I said, since although she shows some of her deceptions to Selyse openly, the sense that she is using Selyse still, I felt, came across to some degree, and I would even say it seemed like she was mocking Selyse a bit as well when they were discussing how she had sex with Stannis, and when Selyse asked if her having sex with Stannis in the last season was Melisandre, just using a potion to get him horny, for lack of better words. Ironically, though, I think the true symbolism of the Mockingbird can be associated with Selyse, i.e. the symbolism of honesty can be associated with Selyse in this context, since although, she is a completely messed up character, she does believe and trust in her faith with honesty, which would make her the literal Mockingbird in this sense. And I do think it's interesting how the two crazies, or the two female crazies of this episode, i.e. Selyse and Lady Lysa Arryn at the end, they're both kind of nuts, but I do think that the Mockingbirds, like the legitimate Mockingbird imagery of innocence or honesty or whatever, well, I guess innocence in this case, is in very strange ways associated with these two characters, because their perceived innocence and honesty is brought right across, even though it is tainted with a sense of misguidedness or misguided purpose. So yeah, just a little food for thought. But to move away from this trope for this scene, however, the scene does end with Melisandre stating that Selyse needs to bring Shireen with her when they do venture north after they leave Dragonstone, since, quote, according to Melisandre, the Lord of Light needs her, i.e. needs her Shireen, their daughter, Stannis' daughter. Now, this is not a spoiler, but my personal direct reading from this line is that it almost seems like Melisandre wants to burn Shireen or sacrifice her to the Lord of Light. And I especially felt that way since, Selyse and Melisandre are staring directly into the burning flames in the foreground in the scene when this line is delivered. And that, it just reeked too much of danger for Shireen. And of course, I don't want to see Shireen get hurt or injured or anything like that, but that was my personal emotive reading from this scene when I witnessed that occur. Moving it along, we then have a scene at the Wall with Jon Snow and his men finally getting back to the Wall at Castle Black, but upon arriving, the temporary commander of the Night's Watch, Sir Alistair Thorne, demands that Jon locks his wolf up. Now again, in my mind, this immediately signals that Jon is in some form put in a bad position, or is, in a negative emotional state as far as we can relate to him. In this scene, I felt it was more like he was in a bad position, though not so much, him not being relatable to the audience, since whenever, like I said before, whenever the owner of a mythical creature, direwolf, a dragon, in the case of Daenerys, is split off from their creature, something negative seems to follow, or they aren't behaving true to themselves. But in this case, Jon Snow, he requests to block the passage through the wall to, stop Mance Rayder's invading army, since the metal gate that permits people to go between the wall to the other side is not strong enough to withstand the the might or strength of giants, which Jon brings up in this scene. And of course, in this case, Jon's request to block that passage is denied. Now, I realize the fact that, he's not with Ghost isn't directly linked to him not getting, or is not directly linked to him successfully asking Sir Alistair to block off the gate, but I do think the symbolic absence of Ghost is representative of Jon's own lack of power in the situation with Alistair Thorne. I didn't have many other thoughts for that scene, so I guess I'm going to move it along to the Riverlands and, of course, events on the King's Road, so that is to say events with Arya and the Hound, and then with Brienne and Podrick Payne. Now, again, in the Riverlands, Arya and the Hound are together. I've made the comment before that their partnership can be paralleled with Brienne and Pod, but with, the genders and even the roles reversed, I think. And I believe, this really came across loud and clear this episode. Arya did deliver an interesting line to the dying man in this first scene. I think she said, quote, "Nothing isn't better or worse than anything. Nothing is just nothing," which is a very interesting and I guess very true line if I think long and hard about it. Well, I say this is an interesting line because I think it really speaks to both Arya's current mental state, which is evidenced by the fact that she told the dying man who she truly was, and of course by the fact that she killed the biter later on in the scene. But at the same time, this is, I believe, a small hint of things to come for Arya, but I will say no more on that since that is spoiler territory. So basically after Sandor offs the peasant, someone appears and, like I said, tries to bite him, and this is the biter. I think his name is Biter. It turns out, to be one of the two criminals who were traveling with Arya and the Men of the Night's Watch to the Wall in season 2, when she was pretending to be Ari, the boy. But the Hound quickly kills that guy off fast, and the other one, Rorge, gets killed off after Arya asks him his name, which, reminds us of Arya's killing list of people she wants to kill for having done her wrong. And I guess, once more we can add another death to Arya's vengeance list, even though it was like, a very quick addition that was quickly scratched off thereafter. Or right away after. Later on, we also have the Hound and Arya sitting together, with the Hound trying to sew up his wound and refusing to use fire to disinfect the wound properly. Now, I thought it was interesting how the two characters bonded again, in a way which I feel contrasts powerfully with the Brienne and Podrick scene. Because here we have an adult male figure sharing his emotions with Arya, telling her how he feels and about the emotional torment he had growing up with his brother, pretty much as she sews him up. And I'm kind of thinking about this right now, but it really does kind of echo back to Tyrion's relationship with his sister, since in that dynamic we had an older sister torturing a young Theon, or young baby Theon. I think it was that she grabbed his manhood, which eventually becomes something that, in a way dominates his life, since he's, at least for a long part in season 1, he is constantly hooking up with hookers or prostitutes, and his life becomes dominated by his sexual drive. Whereas here, Sandor Clegane's brother, having disfigured him, has made one of Sandor's main concerns or anxieties fire, because fire was what was used to torture him when he was young. And of course, Tyrion doesn't really remember his personal torture, doesn't seem, but the idea that, these two objects or body parts, as that aspect which was as the aspect that was the object of torture by older siblings in these two cases, kind of brings up that they are played off in a Freudian maybe way later on. Did that make any sense? Well, I hope it did. I don't think it really did, though. I apologize, guys. Really late at night. I really shouldn't be doing this right now, but I have to share my thoughts. So, yeah, I hope that made sense. Anyway, so he's basically sharing his emotions so the Hound is basically sharing his emotions with Arya in a very soft way. It's a male figure, adult figure, like I said, sharing his thoughts with a younger female figure. But in the next scene, we have Podrick Payne and Brienne, where Brienne almost interacts and treats Pod like a father might with a son, or with a daughter even, potentially. Well, at least that's how I felt. She was chastising him not to drink too much, and, that this was a little treat for Pod in a way, and that, now he can't be wearing those silk linens he used to wearing at King's Landing. So it was kind of it was an interesting, role reversal in this scene, and I find it especially interesting how the dynamic with these two characters here, along with Arya and the Hound, it's the female character specifically who almost appears to wield some form of power or authority over their male sidekicks in some form or some degree. That's just at least how I read it anyway. I think the best part of this scene right here is that we get to see Hot Pie once again, and he even quotes Gendry from season 2 by saying that most people wearing armor are knights. At least I think that was Gendry that said that. It was either Gendry or Arya, actually, but I think it was Gendry though. Anyway, even if the main thought I had from this line was that even if Brienne would deny it, she clearly is a knight given, well, she's wearing armor and, she's sworn a vow to Jaime Lannister to find and keep Sansa Stark and Arya presumably safe. Beyond this, however, I think the most intriguing part of the scene is that other characters finally find out that Arya is still alive and, well, relatively well, I guess. But it does seem as though now Brienne and Pod are going to venture towards the Eyrie in the hopes of finding both Arya and Sansa, and I'm really curious to see how that's going to end up since, well, given the events of the very next scene, or the very last scene or location in this episode, which is, of course, events occurring at the Eyrie. So, the first thing I need to say is just how much Sansa looks like her mother in this scene. The way her hair is done, the way she wore her cloak, just everything about her, the scene reminded me of Catelyn Stark, and I swear I was not just hallucinating that. I'm sure some of you must agree with me on that point. Even the way she scolded Robin, although it wasn't really cat-like, it was almost in the same way a stern mother might do that. Of course, I think this was intentional since it is meant to show Peter Baelish's emotions for her when he kisses her. But to digress away from that trope, there was an interesting line that young Robin, the future husband, or at least the future planned husband of Sansa Stark, said was that when we get married, you can tell me if you don't like somebody and we can bring them back and whoosh, push them right through the moon door, which was clearly something Sansa did not mind. But it was interesting because I think for the first time ever, Sansa's starting to express a form of bloodlust or a form of, not being so innocent as she used to be. We also, find out the true reason why Peter claims to be helping Sansa is that, he loved Catelyn and wants to help Sansa because of that. And in a way, he does sort of stand for the Mockingbird image of I guess an innocence, a form of innocence that existed when he was young, and his feelings towards Catelyn, at least. That's the topical reading I get from it. But in the end, his emotions are clearly warped since now he is almost expressing them on Sansa, and it's also messed up given that he is responsible, I feel, for the death of Catelyn Stark herself, since he is the one who sparked all the madness of this season, or of the entire series, I mean. So it's a little bit ironic that he stated that. And of course, in this case, he is lying, I think, at some degree. Even though Peter is supposed to be the Mockingbird, and it's also symbolized by the pin he wears, like I said, I think the true Mockingbird there's two of them in this scene, but one of them is, or at least it was, Sansa Stark, who, just like a real Mockingbird, sang songs that were pleasant to people, and, she really lived only to please and to be innocent. And if I recall, Cersei Lannister used to call Sansa her little dove, her little bird, which, although it's not the same thing as a mockingbird, it is reminiscent of that idea that Sansa was there to, please and to obey and to act innocent. But by the end of this episode, I think she is really starting to learn that she can't just be the innocent Mockingbird that she was through this whole series, since, no matter where she goes, people will try to harm her, including her own family members, like her Aunt Lysa. So I think this is the start of the end, or the beginning of the end, for the image of Sansa as this innocent mockingbird. And I don't know if they're going to go in the direction of making her the, mocking space bird, the woman or female that is mocking to men. But in a sense, she was quite stern with Robin, and she And I could see her going that way, considering the power she has, the emotional power anyway, she seems to have over Peter Baelish. At least that's the sense I'm getting from this specific episode. So, moving on from my thoughts on just Sansa, though, I think Lysa, in a sense, also epitomizes the other Mockingbird in this episode, since, you know, she lived only to try and please Peter innocently and do everything for him and, you know, maintain the sense of innocence. But in the end, her own innocence was twisted and, like, used against her. And, you know, it resulted not only in the deaths of so many people just for her to achieve her own ends, but it resulted in her own despair and basically death. And of course, this becomes apparent when, in the end, this Mockingbird that Lysa was flew out of the moon door, ending her life as the Mockingbird, singing her sweet songs to Peter Baelish and her false songs to her family members. So that basically concludes my thoughts on this episode of Game of Thrones. Again, I apologize if I didn't make sense at some points. It's really, really late here. I'm pretty exhausted, so that's all I can really say for myself or explain in terms of my lack of coherency tonight, or, well, I guess whenever you guys see it. Again, you know, if you did enjoy this video in spite of all its bleh moments, please don't hesitate to like it, subscribe my channel, and comment. I love hearing people's thoughts. Let me know what you thought of this episode. Definitely one of the most epic ones for me this season. Lysa's death was something that I was expecting for some time, and it was pretty epic. Definitely an epic way to end the episode, so it's only going to get better from here. That's all I can really say. 3 episodes left of Game of Thrones this season, so there's a lot to expect in the end. What else is there to say? Again, check out my group review with James Johnson. A link to his video will be in the info section below. Also, I have a number of videos I intend to upload that I've already made. More, you know, fluffy, casual stuff, but I've been so busy with my schoolwork that I just haven't had any time to upload them. I really, you know, I can't fathom how any of you other guys get time to do this, but I guess it's just because I'm, you know, trying to finish a master's degree. So anyway, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, folks, take care.